17 U.S.C. 107 federal law allows citizens to use copyrighted media for fair use. That is criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody.
Shall forth your praise. Kuma, Yahweh, Weafutsu Yabeka, Weahusumi Feneka Yupeneka. Kuma, Yahweh, Weafutsu Yabeka, Weanusumi Feneka Yupeneka. Kuma, Yahweh, Weafutsu Yabeka, Weanusumi Feneka Yupeneka. Arise of you, O Yahweh. Let your enemies be scattered, and let those that hate thee flee from before thee. Let all of Yasharah, Yisrael, who love, worship, and praise Yahweh, give him thanks by saying hallelujah.
So let's just get started. Let me just pray everybody in. In the name of Yahushua HaMashiach Amayah, I pray that everyone who is meant to hear this message will hear it. And I pray that the eyes of their understanding would be enlightened, that you would give them a spirit of wisdom, revelation, and knowledge to know what is the hope of their calling, the inheritance of the assembly, and the riches of your glory in Yahushua HaMashiach Abayah. And I pray also that the Ruach HaKodesh would lead them into all truth, and that the seed of your word would be planted firmly in their hearts. I pray a guard over this message. I pray that you send warring angels to surround and encompass me and set me on your rock. Cover me with your great hand, Abayah. And I pray that you would guide my words, that my speech would be seasoned with salt. And I pray that you would bless the hearers, and that whatever they receive today would be planted in the fallow ground of their heart. And I pray you cause it to bring forth fruit. And I pray that you would show them things to come. And I pray that they would have the courage to ask of you things to come regarding your sons and the works of your hands command you, Abayah, because we know that the Ruach HaKodesh is the spirit of prophecy. The witness of Hamashiach is the spirit of prophecy, okay, according to Isaiah 45. And so we thank you, Abba Yah, that we are kings and priests in Yahushua HaMashiach. And so I pray that you bless the hearers. I pray that you surround me with your angels and also the audience, that you cover us, Abba Yah, that your word would go forth and that it would be planted where it's supposed to be, and that those who hear it would hear it. I just bless your holy name. There is none like you, Yahuwah. You've just blessed me so much this week and so much in my life. I'm so grateful to you that you are Abba Yah, my Father. And so I just thank you and ask you to just come in, enter in, and take authority to rule and reign over this message, and that those angels silence and your angels would keep out the enemy, and that they would be deaf to the words of this message, that if anything that comes forth that they should know about it, that they wouldn't hear about it. And I pray blessings on this channel and blessings to all who come here in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach. Amen. So family, welcome. The land of Shem defined and the shape of the earth. You're going to get more clarity from this discussion that I'm going to have with you today on where is the true land. And so what I thought was, we have to figure out where the land of Ham is, where the land of Shem is, and then where the land of Abraham is. And I think that that will help us to differentiate and to determine and figure out what is what. But in order to do so, we have to again attempt to define the lands of Shem and Ham and Japheth using scripture and geographical references. And I will use the Earth's pole, Babel, the mountains of the moon, reverse Pangaea, Egypt, the Americas, and the stars in order to reverse Pangaea and define the land of Shem, which is called Aphia, or Isaiah. And it's what we now call Africa, but it's actually called, the land of Shem is called Aphia or Isaiah. And the land of Ham is actually in the west, what we know to be North and Central America. And that was originally called Africa. So they've flipped the script on us again. So I'm going to attempt to undo that. We've already established that Shem is the ruler of the earth, that Yasharel is the ruler of the earth, Israel, and that Hannibal's coin is very likely either King David or King Solomon's coin, with the elephant representing the pillars of the earth and the mountains below the elephant's feet representing the mountains of the moon. The shape of the head of Africa is the shape of the head of a black man, and everything else that has dispersed above in the west and in the north is his afro. And the south, which is also part of Shem's land, South America, is his neck. The Urbano Monte map of 1587. The map is 9 feet by 9 feet, and it's 60 individual sheets. Was criticized for grossly overrepresenting the size of North America. It is an azimuthal map. In other words, it represents the plain Earth, but it can also be made into a round Earth globe. An azimuthal map is when you portray the North Pole at the center of the map. That's the definition. Monte was very geo-savvy for his day, and he drew from the works of cartographers like Gerardus Mercator, Abraham Ortelius. His maps included recent discoveries that were first cited by Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan. So you see he's part of this same community that I mentioned in the last video. All of these black navigators and cartographers who helped Columbus find America. And so we will talk about him also. And so we see that this quadrant of the earth is occupied by Africa. All right, and this is the land of Shem as defined. This portion came forth by lot for Shem and his sons, that they should possess it forever until the end of time. This portion came forth by lot to Shem and his sons, for they should possess it forever unto his generations forevermore. And Noah rejoiced that this portion came forth for Shem and for his sons, and he remembered all that he had spoken with his mouth in prophecy, for he had said, Blessed be the Most High Yahweh of Shem, and may Yahweh dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And he knew that the Garden of Eden, let's one more time, the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies and the dwelling place of the Most High, and Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Sinai, the center of the navel of the earth. And these three were created as holy places facing each other. So this would be at the center of the earth. And he blessed the Most High of gods who had put the word of the Most High into his mouth, and the Most High forevermore. And he knew that a blessed portion and blessing had come to Shem and his sons unto generations forever. The whole land of Eden. So the land of Shem is the land of Eden, because ultimately that's where HaMashiach will come down, right? And so why are all these flat earth, like Rob Skiba and all that, not talking about? This is Israel. And he knew that a blessed portion of blessing had come to Shem and his sons for generations forever, the whole land of Eden, the whole land of the Red Sea, and the whole land of East India, and the Red Sea and the mountains thereof, the land of Bashan, and all the land of Lebanon, and the islands of Katur, and the mountain of Senir, and Amanah, and the mountains of Asher in the north, and all the land of Elam, Asher, Susan, Madai, Babel, and Babel, and Babel, and Madai, and all the mountains of Ararat, and all the region beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Ashur towards the north, a blessed and spacious land that is very good. There's this illustration, which you've seen before in my other videos, of Holy Mount Zion being here at the center. So once again, here's the description, but we see in this older image, we see Mount Zion at the center. And where is it? It is at the top here. It's at the top, at the center. Just like whenever I describe my reverse Pangaea and I describe that part of Africa going, that's around here, which is kind of Israel, going and connecting up here whenever I do my little reverse Pangaea video, right? Like my little cheesy graphics, right? It always ends up here at the center of the earth, Israel. This is the frontal lobe of the face of Africa. This is the frontal lobe of the head. That's what Israel is currently right now. All of Africa is the land of Shem. This is what I'm trying to get to. And there came forth on the writing as Shem's lot, the middle of the earth, which he should take as an inheritance for himself, and for his sons, and for the generations of eternity. From the middle of the mountain range of Rapha, from the mouth of the water, from the river of Tina, and his portion goes towards the west, through the midst of this river, and it extends till it reaches the water of the abyss, out of which this river goes forth and pours its waters into the sea Miat. And this river flows into the great sea, and all that is towards the north is Japheth's, and all that is towards the south belongs to Shem. And all that is towards the south belongs to Shem. And it extends till it reaches Caraso, and this is the bosom of the tongue which looks towards the south. And his portion extends along the great sea, and it extends in a straight line till it reaches the west of the tongue, which looks towards the south. For this sea is named the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And it turns here towards the south, towards the mouth of the great sea, on the shore of its waters, and it extends west to Afra. Wait, Ham's land is in the west? Afra is in the west? Because Ham's land is called Africa. Shem's land, what we call Africa today, is called Aphia. And because he was the firstborn son, he got two portions, a double portion. So he got half the earth, and Ham and Japheth got a quarter each. The portion of the eldest son is what? A double portion. That is Torah. Torah is that the eldest son gets a double portion. So King James, Deuteronomy 21:17 says that he must give a double portion of whatever he owns, and he shall acknowledge the firstborn son, okay, giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning of his strength, and the right of the firstborn is his. So that's how we know that the firstborn son gets a double portion. Once again, north, south, east, and west is not up and down. It is the four corners of the earth divided into quarters of north, south, east, and west, and the west is determined for destruction. It extends till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon, and to the south of the waters of Gihon, to the banks of this river. And it extends towards the east till it reaches the Garden of Eden, to the south thereof, to the south, and to the east of the whole land of Eden, and the whole of the east. It turns to the east, and it proceeds till it reaches east of the mountain named Rapha, and it descends to the bank of the mouth of the river Tina. This portion came forth by lot for Shem and his sons, that they should possess it forever, unto his generations forevermore. And he knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, and the dwelling of the Lord, and the Mount Sinai, the center of the desert, and Mount Zion, the center of the navel of the earth. These three were created as holy places facing each other. And he blessed the God of gods, who had put the word of the Lord in his mouth, and the Lord forevermore. And he knew that a blessed portion and a blessing had come to Shem and his sons unto the generations forever. So once again, what happened was Africa was Ham's land in the west. Japheth or Japheth was in the north. And of course, Shem got the east and the south. That is his allotment. So if we look at this ancient compass, what it does is it shows very clearly this division. So when we look at this representation, now remember, in other videos I said the land of Shem, the land of Israel, was the Orient. Why? Because it's at the navel center of the earth around which everything else is oriented. Okay? And it was called a Phaya. Remember, in the King James, all S's are F's. Okay? So it would be called a Phaya or a Saya. And so when we look at this ancient representation of the earth and the lands allotted to Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and we look at this ancient compass, so this is a very accurate compass. And you notice, see at the top, it has the east-south. It only has west, north, and east here because these are Ham and Japheth's land. But you see it has east-south, implying, denoting, and suggesting that this was all one area, east married to south. Hallelujah. Because Shem's land is east, southeast, east-south, southwest, all the way to the west. So it goes all the way from the east to the south to the west. Ham's land goes all the way from the west around to the north. And we have yet to establish, figure out, and determine whether or not Brazil or those southern lands, which is now, I know you guys have changed my story a bit, might actually be Shem's land as well. Those southern lands. It's yet to be determined. So I'm speculating, I'm investigating. These are the thoughts going through my mind. Brazil may well be the neck of the head of Africa, the neck of Shem. And that's why it's in the south, because he got all the south. And Japheth's land goes all the way from the north to the edge of the east. Okay? So this is how we have to reorient ourselves. Understanding that Shem's land is up and is the oriental land. The whole world is oriented around it. Why? Because he was given the land of Eden. See, it says that's why Satan looked to change times and seasons and even the shape of the earth at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. So this is the reason why Mercator did all the work he was doing. To hide true Jerusalem. And who said they were going to hide true Jerusalem? Well, it was actually, and I've learned this from other teacher videos, Emperor Hadrian stated he wanted to hide Jerusalem. And so that's what Satan did. And that's why the transatlantic slave trade and the redrawing of maps all corresponds with the round earth model. To hide true Jerusalem and the truth about how everyone oriented themselves in the earth and the distribution of lots, Shem, Ham, and Japheth's lands. So just to review, in the last video, we discussed the fact that Egypt was part of the Solomonic Empire, Solomon's Empire, okay? And its golden age, the Orion age, the golden age. And it's not actually, as I've said before, the land of Ham. This is the land of Shem. And we confirmed that the pyramids were built before 1100 BC, the Egyptian ones. And they had no monoliths, they had no pillars, and they had no Sanskrit or drawings or inscriptions on them. The three pyramids of Giza existed on their own, two of them having just the two sets of three pyramids at either of their sides. Okay? All other pyramids were set up many centuries, if not thousands of years later, and that includes all the images of the Egyptian gods. We also noted that the lion, the riddle of the Sphinx is that the Sphinx was not a sphinx, that it was actually a lion. A lion. Because the Sphinx, the head of the Sphinx, was much newer, much younger, and nowhere near as worn as the body of the lion. And there are geologists who have proven this. The Egyptologists say contrary, but the geologists are like, no, this stone is much older. So the Sphinx would have more likely been a lion because Israel doesn't mix different seeds together. That's what the nations do. We also found that there was a habit among the people of this region to wear a lion's mane for a headdress, a lion's mane. So that's where this lion's mane shape comes from. But of course, it was more likely originally a lion, the Lion of Judah, as inscribed on one of the walls here. We established that Abram brought sciences to the Egyptians, and that is according to Josephus in chapter 8, that Abraham had communicated to them arithmetic and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abram came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, for that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt, and from thence to the Greeks also. Jacob is the former of all things. Abram gave them the centimeter, the millimeter, the meter, the cubit, and the golden ratio.
Fresh water from the Nile. They measured one drop and then another. They were all the same size. The diameter of the drop of water on a waterproof surface, like granite or alabaster, is constant. It measures 1 centimeter. The meter is a universal unit because it is measured on water. Water is the only material that is stable. All other materials or objects are difficult to measure, or else they vary over time. The architecture of the entire universe is constructed with this unit. They named this small unit the royal finger. 10 drops of water or 10 royal fingers equals 1 royal hand. 100 drops of water, so 100 royal fingers or 10 royal hands, equals 1 royal leg. The royal finger was called the centimeter, the royal hand the decimeter, and the royal leg the meter. From this experience, they also deduced the decimal system. From then on, all of Egypt would have as a standard a universal constant, the royal cubit, the golden ratio. Pi, the golden ratio, the royal cubit, the whole panoply of sacred geometry with the meter. The Egyptians knew the Fibonacci sequence in the golden number thousands of years before him and called it the addition sequence.
When we examine the symbol for house, Bayet, it is this golden ratio. So this is the family, the tent, the house, the earth. This is the code for everything. And this is why Hebrew is a pictographic language, because it speaks practically to reality. So we also established that the meter had so many biblical references. All of these measurements did. And some of the primary ones was the meter, which was called mitznefeth, or official turban or diadem for the high priest. And so I give a lot of references, but one of the main ones was Leviticus, and he shall put on the holy linen coat, and he shall have the linen breeches upon his flesh, and shall be girded with a linen girdle, and the linen mitre. With the linen mitre he shall be attired, and these are the holy garments. Therefore shall he wash his flesh in water, and so put them on. And so you can imagine it was about 1 meter long, and it would be wrapped around the head as a turban or a headband. and whatnot. Also, there were holy measurements for buildings. A window shalt thou make to the ark, so this is at the time of Noah, in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. So this is before the Egyptian Empire, okay? Also in Ezekiel, it says, and behold, a wall outside the house and round about, in the man's hand a measuring reed of 6 cubits long by cubit, and a hand breadth. So he measured the breadth of the building 1 reed. Now here in Ezekiel, in these various verses, including Revelation, it says the length of a reed is given as 6 cubits, each being about a cubit and a palm, or hand's breadth. Okay, so those are the measurements that were just described to us in Egypt. Cornerstone, a key Hebraic concept developed possibly from the Egyptian captivity, but principally and probably first related to Hamashiach, Yahusha.
They pour the white concrete, and about 30 minutes later the mold is filled. Today we call this process formwork construction.
So stubble or straw was basically crushed rock used to make formwork bricks. This was the origins of masonry, which the Hebrews had originated, and they used it when they were in Egypt to build their structures and their own pyramids at Giza, of course, the Israelites. And so here's some scriptures that prove it. Exodus 5:12. So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. The word is teben, and it's from the word H1129 in Strong's, and it says straw, threshing, or chaff, but the origin is said to be doubtful, but not improbable, and it really denotes building material. And then we have another example in scripture where Job says the arrow cannot make him flee, sling stones are turned with him into stubble. So stubble is another word for ground up stone, and so that's how we know that it was actually ground up stone that was used to make a cement-like substance to construct the pyramids for Solomon and the pyramids for the Egyptians.
The architect Hemiunu and Khufu go up symbolically to unveil the pyramidion. The pyramidium is revealed. The crowd shouts with joy. 20 years of hard work for their king is coming to an end.
You'll hear from the indigenous Americans as well as the 10 tribes that there was a dispute after the death of King Solomon, that he had taxed the northern kingdom too much in work, in building for him. And he had built actually a kingdom for his Egyptian wife. And the northern kingdom were very well known to be brick makers. And the language used for brick making, it's actually not brick making with provender made of straw. The material used is actually stone, broken up stone, not straw. And of course, this is what split the northern and southern kingdom, was that the southern kingdom was forcing the northern kingdom to make these bricks for buildings and structures like this. We also established that the pyramids were power generators, not tombs, because according to this ancient document from the Egyptians at the time when the Hebrews left them and they were in a state of chaos, they say that none shall sail northwards to Byblos today. What shall we do for cedar trees for our mummies, with the produce of which priests are buried, and with the oil of which chiefs are embalmed, as far as Kishfu. So in other words, they didn't bury people in pyramids, and here's more confirmation.
Many of the sarcophagi were empty when discovered. Almost all mummies, whether they are important figures in society or not, have been found in wooden coffins and not in granite sarcophagi.
We look at these people coming up from the south, perhaps towards Central and North America. We can see they look very black, and they were likely other Shemites who were in the Brazilian regions.
The pyramid was oriented east, relative
to Eden and Yah.
Orientation to the east automatically indicates all directions with the same precision. Indeed, the Egyptians did not care about the north. There was nothing in the north apart from primitive peoples. The south was sacred to them because it was where they came from, their roots. It is for this reason that cities were then built up the Nile, to be closer to their origins.
The truth is that the Most High will descend in the south.
The first quarter is called the east, because it is the first, and the second the south, because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend.
The position of the sun is exactly facing the king's sarcophagus. There is much debate over whether the pyramids are tombs and whether the sarcophagi are intended for bodies.
Ever since scientists have been studying the Great Pyramids there at Giza, there has been speculation that they may have been energy generators, some kind of power plants. And of course, the mainstream Egyptologists are saying, oh, these are just simple tombs for pharaohs.
But the Great Pyramid has the precision of a machine, and so when you consider it as a machine, you see that there are certain functions that each part of the pyramid performs. The subterranean chamber is evidence itself, and it has been demonstrated by an engineer by the name of John Cadman, who created a model of the subterranean chamber, and by feeding water in it, the chamber itself seems to cause some very unusual reactions in the pyramid.
The water would rush down the shaft of the Great Pyramid down to the subterranean chamber, which was about 330 feet. It would bypass a valve, and then the valve would slam shut, and it would cause a shock wave to be sent up the Great Pyramid itself, and then it would shoot towards the ceiling that was directly below the King's Chamber. It's a freestanding granite tuned room, and it would cause that to resonate at a specific frequency.
The granite is the same material that you would use in a microphone or a telephone. It vibrates through the introduction of sound, and it emits electrons. Well, you take that phenomenon and you control it inside the Great Pyramid, then you have a machine that can vibrate that granite as much as an earthquake would vibrate granite in the earth and create electromagnetic energy.
Christopher Dunn's theories indicates that the Great Pyramid was sending a microwave signal. And in fact, studies of his working devices have shown that this probably would work. We could have been sending messages into space. It's very similar to the SETI program.
It is my suspicion, belief, and hypothesis that what they call the King's Chamber or the sarcophagus relates very much more to the Sephargus. Sephir guys. Now, I haven't checked the etymology, but in my spirit, I'm like, I wonder, and I hope I'm not wrong, and I hope Yah forgives me just for speculating on this, but I wonder if that's where they might have put something like the ark or the stones to create a geyser which sent the words of Yah out through the top of these light generators. and they would possibly hit the firmament and disperse the word or the message over the world, or perhaps it was a form of praise to Yah. It was perhaps projected through them, and they were perhaps stone tablets or something like that were placed in the sarcophagus, and then the electrical frequency was sent out, not only creating a light in the world, but like a geyser, like a Sefer geyser. It sent the water, the living water of the word, out to the world in the same way that the priests wore the ephod, which had the Urim and Thummim on it, which would also, they'd use that and the lights on it to make decisions and get light-based frequencies from Yah or the Ruach HaKodesh in order to make decisions and determinations. In the worst case scenario, they would be places where half alien or Rephaim would sleep to power themselves at night, or fallen angels. In the worst case scenario, it would be where fallen angels or Rephaim would sleep to strengthen themselves at night, being in their dying state, like vampires. And these ley lines line up with both the largest pyramid in the world, which is in Mexico, and Stonehenge, which of course is in Britannia. And ironically, these are also ley lines that button, if you will, or connect or link, what we call the continent of Africa, which I say is Afaya, back to the center of the earth when we reverse Pangaea and connected it Greenland. So those 3 points of great ley lines that were mentioned in the documentary I included in this teaching button the land of Shem back up into the center of the earth. And there's no one theorizing on Egypt's connection to Americas as being factors to the structures that are on both lands. Another thing that we looked at was we looked at the stars, and we looked in particular at the cluster Orion, which lines up with the 3 great pyramids. And the stars also speak of Israel. Their names were looked at in Arabic and Hebrew, and we learned that there was the constellation Kessel, which means strong one or hero, or Orion means Orion, in other words, light age, age of light, or golden age, or heaven. And of course, Betelgeuse is like Betelgeuse, so house of bread, house of the Jews. Analim and Regal and Messiah are also part of this star system, and they speak to the Messiah, the regal one, and of course Orion's belt is like the belt of truth, and there's supposed to be a scabbard or a sword hanging down as well. So it very much speaks to the nature and culture and prophecy of this being the kingdom of Israel.
Find megalithic sites everywhere around the world, and there's a tendency to make circles or certain types of formations.
Megalithic sites occur all over the world. Is their placement random, or does the location of these sites reveal yet another hidden layer of ancient knowledge?
So the largest pyramids in the world are actually in the Americas. Teotihuacan, America's largest pyramids. So it's near Mexico City.
If you go into England, for example, the ley lines that cross England, the Michael line, which is hundreds of miles long, that crosses England, that carries this energy along that line. And typically where lines cross, where you get more than one line intersecting, temples were often built. They were always built on lines like this.
I think that the ley lines are simply a guide to correct and reverse Pangaea. back to its proper image and place.
Thousands of Egyptians traveled to America, now Guatemala, for the first time between 2000 and 3000 years BC. But not only the Egyptians, many other Africans accompanied them. Recent analyses of Egyptian mummies have revealed traces of cocaine. The coca grows only in America. In addition, you must imagine them observing and measuring the equinoxes and solstices to align the pyramids. Then find the chemical formula for making concrete. By comparing the buildings of America and those of Egypt, the resemblance is striking, like 2 drops of water. Stronger evidence? What if we measured the pyramids of Central America? Now you know how the meter was invented. And now the ultimate. The Egyptians who arrived here on the other side of the world built a pyramid with the meter and pi. The base of the Pyramid of the Sun measures 220 meters. Converted into units of inches, feet, or from yard, it becomes difficult for workers. In meters, the numbers are whole. The diagonal of the pyramid is pi in meters. The base of the pyramid, 220 meters, divided by the height. That is to say, 70 meters. The result is pi, 3.1428. Compared with Khufu, pi 3.1429. The error is 0.0001%. The layout of the other pyramids is also in integers, in meters. The geometry of the Tikal pyramid is exactly that of Khufu. In 1983, archaeologist Garth Norman discovered that the Egyptian royal cubit was used by the builders in the edifices of Central America.
One thing about all these documentarians from K2 and the Pyramid Code is that they don't take reverse Pangaea into account. So here we have Atlantis between Africa and North America. This is another connecting point. And it was submerged in the sea, probably as, part of the destruction of the Babylonian Empire.
On the other hand, we see here indisputably the same fingerprint, the same civilization, Egypt. 12,000 kilometers separate Egypt from Mexico. How did they manage to cross 7,800 kilometers of ocean?
They didn't reverse Pangaea. If this was the position of Africa only 500 years ago in relation to North America and Europe, Western Europe, and this is the position of Canada and Alaska in relation to Russia only 500 years ago, you can imagine 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, the distance was shorter.
And there is no shortage of Negroid faces. In 1946, giant heads called Olmecs were discovered. We see clearly African Negro heads. The African Olmecs were discovered in Central America, at the very place where the pyramids were found. It is the Egyptians' landing place. Here are details of the stelas E and D of Quirigua. The 2 figures have the same posture holding the scepter, and all 3 have the same type of beard as that of Tutankhamun. The Native Americans had no beards, not to mention broken noses. On the architecture side in America, as in Egypt, the workers applied the same construction method of pyramids and temples. All life was organized around them. The limestone was burned to make lime and mortar. With this mortar, they built all the pyramids of Central America. Hundreds of pyramids and temples were built in Guatemala, in the Yucatan and southern Mexico. All were built by Afro-Egyptians, made of concrete volcanic ash mixed with lime. They were all aligned with Sirius, the stars of the constellation Orion. Later, they moved to Teotihuacan and Tula. Here, it wasn't whole concrete blocks like in Egypt, but natural volcanic stone mixed with concrete. The construction method is the same for Khufu Pyramid via corridors. Of course, the city of Tula and Teotihuacan were built with the Egyptian meter as a unit of measure. the Egyptians aligned the city of Teotihuacan with, now you know it. The city was aligned at 14 degrees 7, not with the north, but with the southwest, with Betelgeuse, Alnilam, and Rigel, passing through the hemisphere's axis on November 20th at midnight, around at least 2200 BC. This alignment is observed during these years, give or take 50 years. This tells us the date of construction of the city of Teotihuacan.
The constellation of Orion is often called Orion the Hunter, but it is just currently that, as Esau is ruling the world and he's known to be the hunter. It is truly representative of Israel and Jacob and Hamashiach standing up. You see he's got the belt of truth. He's got the sword of the Spirit. I believe this is his torso. And the little triangle at the top, that is his breastplate of righteousness with Messi at the solar plexus of his body, or the Messiah. So these are the names of some of the stars and constellations. And so this sword is very important because it is hanging down from his scabbard, and then it is raised up in a couple of ways. It's raised up to against the north and the west at a certain point, and then it is thrown out to strike Hades, and we'll see how that works. But it is also how the nations would navigate everybody, not by the North Pole, but by Orion.
So, let's find directions with it. I'll pitch the technique quickly, but then we'll expand on it and further understand it on a fundamental level of Orion across our night sky. So it appears in the east, travels across the southern side of the sky, and disappears into the west. Does that ring any bells? I can think of another star that follows a similar motion, fades into the east, travels across the southern side of the sky, and eventually fades away into the west, repeating that for emphasis. So we won't use this constellation to find north directly. Oh no. We will use it to find north indirectly through using it to find south, east, and west. So, how? The first thing to take into consideration is its tilt. As a general rule, when it's tilted to the left, it's eastern. When it's upright, it's south. When it's tilted to the right, it's west. And you can judge the severity of the tilt by looking at the sword. When it's at center stage, completely vertical. Likewise, on the horizon, it's pretty diagonal. Because the constellation is a bit wonky, admittedly, but the sword is there as a guide if you need it.
We already talked about the stars in the Orion constellation, but what's interesting is that, of course, it lines up perfectly with the three pyramids, and even the belt of Orion, when it is facing northwest, the whole belt lines up perfectly with the tiny pyramids on the far right of Khufu. Over here at the smaller one, Menkaure, the belt of Orion also lines up when it's facing south, which is very interesting. And the whole structure, properly lined up, the whole structure is man facing southeast. And so that is Israel. And his sword is up against the west. The whole thing is used to show the movement of the stars. And it's used to orient people in the north, south, east, and west. It's like an arrow that points to everything. I want to just break down some of the names of these stars into Hebrew. So I haven't broken down all of them, but just a quick shot. Capella would be Het, wall, or Lamed, led to the Pei, face, mouth. Or Ariga would be Aleph, head, Resh, leader, head, Gemel, led. Menkalin is connected to the third pyramid, Menkal, in so-called Egypt. And it's got the Mem, it's got the K for Ka'al, calf, giving, hand, open palm, light, led, Lamed. And then it's Nun, two ends to the seed. So we see this is all talking about Israel, Hamashiach, and Yah in some of these names. So go ahead and check them out for yourself. Some say that the North Pole is actually Satan's morning star. And some say that Sirius was the original star. And so because of the shift of Pangaea, even the stars shifted to carry themselves, the center of the universe, over the continent of Africa. When we look at Orion's constellation, we find that historically it was used to orient the whole Earth, as I say. But when we look at it, we also see that right above this hourglass, or this Orion's belt of truth, is Al-Riga, which is like Aleph for the head and Riga. And so that's a combination of many of the stars' names within Orion's belt. And then we see what is Taurus here. It looks like a sword being thrown down to the right upon Hades. And so he is going to rise up, or has risen up, and is going to kill death and hell. And that is his head. Now remember, this is a dome over us. And so if you look at it that way, his belt being very narrow, his legs are actually some other stars beneath him, which they name Lupus and other names, which are long legs. And so this is really the Aleph of the earth. And this is really the head by which all things are in the celestial stars are oriented. So we even see in this depiction of the Great Rift, and they call it the Milky Way, but it's the Great Rift in the sky, probably where the firmament of the earth was cracked and the great deluge came down to destroy the earth. But we see the head is at the center of the Great Rift. The Aleph, the head, Yahuwah, is at the center of the Great Rift. And you see up above it, to the so-called top, but not the middle, on the top of this representation of the cosmology, you see the North Star, but it's not in the middle of the Great Rift where the water comes down from Eden and probably the Great Deluge came from. There is the North Pole. And so we see here that it's truly the Aleph, our Origa, that is the center of the earth, the head, and that's where Yah is. So I'm just learning this. This is contradicting a lot of my videos, but hallelujah for that. And there has been, it appears to me, to be a slippage of orientation of the planet, and that's due to the land of Shem and the land of Abraham and Israel being shifted down south due to reverse Pangaea and all the other spiritual traumas that affected the earth. And so this is why the book of Enoch, in several translations, says that Yah will descend in the south. That he will descend in the south. And he continues to descend in the south, because that is the land of Shem. But once again, remember, the whole world orients themselves according to the man facing southeast, the Orion constellation, and these pyramids. And it's said that Yah will descend in the south in the book of Enoch.
First quarter is called the east, because it is the first, and the second the south, because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend.
The most prominent god and earliest god to imitate Hamashiach is this god Quetzalcoatl of the land of the Amorites. And this is god of light and wisdom, lord of the day and the winds, ruler from the west. Now the west, right? The west is Egypt, the west is Ham's land. And he is depicted as an Egyptian Christ symbol among the Hamites in the Americas, which is, of course, true Africa. And there are myths and legends in the culture of the Americas of this famous Quetzalcoatl, okay? And he's one of the most important traditional deities of the Mesoamericas. And he's also called Sephirim, or the feathered serpent, of course, which is Ha-Satan, or the precious twin. So this is twin brother, or Esau and Jacob, or the opposer to Hamashiach, which would be Ha-Satan. And he was revered as a patron of the priests in the 14th century and the inventor of calendars and books. Now, the most important thing here is that he was a dog-headed god, but he is said to have descended to the underground of hell to Mictan to gather the bones of the ancient dead, those whose bones he anointed with his own blood, giving birth to the men who inhabit the present universe. So that is more of a Hamashiach resurrection reference. So he is really the closest god that comes to Hamashiach, and probably is the originator of all the other false gods, this Quetzalcoatl. There's also the Karas that I mentioned before, but there's not as much information on him. He may be a dupe, but somebody let me know if you do know. When we look at the Grand Canyon, and they say they found all of these statues and everything of Egyptian gods there, Grand Canyon Egyptian artifacts, because it looks like a waste. Okay. But when we go further up the coast to the Grand Canyon and we start to look at the Gulf of Mexico, and north of that, we can see that something like Egypt existed previously in what is now known as the Grand Canyon. You can see that there is what is called, well, what looks like a temple here, a pyramid, and also over here you see what looks like the head of a sphinx on top of a pyramid. And then at the bottom, you see here what looks like the Isis temple. So they think that they say, and there's images of there being Egyptian tombs in there. So this area, like, which, you know, is east of California and stuff. And when you look at some of the structures in the Grand Canyon, yeah, they call this the Isis temple. And I believe this is, and the angles and everything, see here? So when we look at the pyramids of the Grand Canyon, there's a specific off-limit area of Egyptian relics. And these caves in the Grand Canyon are full of hieroglyphs, glyphs, and Egyptian relics. And most people don't know that they've been suppressed by the federal government, is what this site says. And you can see it. And so here again is the image of a possible sphinx on the top of this structure. This is where the Isis temple is, and the lower part. So here's a closer photo of it. And so these areas are illegal and treacherous to navigate, and this area is known as Kincaid's Cave, where you can enter into. And it says it's named after G. Kincaid, who first entered the cave. He was the first one to, after retiring from the Marines. And he was an archaeologist, and he was sent by the Smithsonian Institute to investigate information reported by John Wesley Powell. And the tunnel is presently on a cliff wall about 400 feet above the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. And they estimate that this cavern is around 3,000 years old. Okay, so it was about 1100 BC that the Solomon's Temple was in full swing. So, you know, I say give or take 1,000 years, because we know that their estimations of time are off within the 6,000 year or week period from the time of the fall to the coming of Hamashiach. I believe there's times outside of that, but this is the time frame we're talking about. So 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, or 3,800 years ago, is about the time that Israel was captive to the Egyptians. And there's this tunnel city that was built in the Grand Canyon. And here are some of the relics. You see this kind of god, clearly Egyptian god. And let me see here. And this is, of course, Cain, as I spoke of. And he was a descendant of King Zaphanath. Okay. Now they say who may have been Joseph in the Bible, but Cain is Cain. And it says this golden tablet was also discovered in the depths of the tunnel. And it says that here's some more of the relics of King Cain. And you see these very clearly Egyptian faces, artifacts, gold relics, the dog god Anubis here. And they're not on display. So there is their history. So here's the tunnels in Powell's Cave. And these are hollowed out man-made caves, and there's lots of hieroglyphics on the walls, it says. And this is supposed to be a shrine for Setaprine, or Seti. Okay. And more hieroglyphics here. So, of course, you know the owl is the Egyptian symbol of wisdom, or their holy spirit of Ha-Satan, right? And there are even crypts, sarcophagi, and these are said to be stone, but they look like they're cedar wood, as I discussed earlier. And there is also a rock vault with statues. So we see here more of these kind of Indo-Asian types of images, faces on these statues. And they're saying, are these named after Egyptian pharaohs? Okay. And here's the Zoroastrian temple of the Hopi Indians. And then here's more of the entrances once again. So this looks like Egypt. Okay. So when we're talking about Israel being captive to Egypt and it being in the area of the Grand Canyon, then, and we look at reverse Pangaea, we're able to make a connection between the land of Africa and the land of Ham, so the land of Aphaya, which is Shem's land, being very closely connected to this land of Africa, which is called America now, and the Grand Canyon. Because one of the things that Yah says that was that Egypt would be totally destroyed. So why is there, with the riddle of the Sphinx, why is Egypt still there in the desert? If Yah said it would be completely destroyed. A lot of those sculptures and statues beneath seem very new, newly carved, unworn. So it may be possible that it is some place of worship existing today, or access to the lower parts of the earth for the people who come up from the desert, from the vacant places. So what happened? This could be pre-flood too. That's another option for this.
North America, which was under a couple of miles of ice sheet, melts and all that water goes into the sea. The sea rises 300 feet over the course of a couple of thousand years, but in stages, and some of those stages very precipitous, maybe corresponding to the biblical flood and possibly Plato's Atlantis myth. So under these circumstances, which are catastrophic the world over, to me, it seems unlikely that the Sphinx and the pyramids, which presuppose a settled and stable and sophisticated society, could have built those amazing structures under those kinds of conditions.
So it could have also been Teotihuacan, because there was a disaster around this time in that area. Now, when we compare Tutankhamun and Teotihuacan, the names are very similar, and these are all the enslaved people of Tutankhamun's treasures, Teotihuacan. So there's a lot more in common with this pyramid being Egypt proper, and of course what Jubilee says about the lands, than the Egypt that we currently know in the land of Shem being the land of Egypt, the true land of Ham's Egypt, around the time of the Egyptian captivity. Another option is that Egypt, the Egypt of Ham, could have been in the Azores. They call it Atlantis. It's a land ridge, or rather a ridge that is between North America and Africa. So you can imagine if Africa was squeezed right up against North America, and then there was a cataclysm and all of Egypt collapsed, this would have disappeared. And it would have been easy or closer for them to cross back to Shem's land.
When Plato indicates Atlantis after the columns of Hercules, in other words, after the Strait of Gibraltar, it is very likely that he is right. This large expanse would be the ridge of the Atlantic. Atlantis would be the Azores.
It may be that when everything was squunched together, that this Atlantic ridge, the Azores, was where the Egypt was. And when Israel fled from Egypt, they crossed a small area called the Reed Sea and back through Gibraltar, being two mountains on either side to make a choice about, and back into the land of Shem. And I'm going to explain to you why I think the Reed Sea may be there when I talk about Babylon.
There may have been a great cataclysm, a giant 300-meter tsunami that swept away all over the Yucatan Peninsula. The survivors, Egyptians and the local population, abandoned the place quickly. At this point, an apocalypse occurred, around 2100 BC. A very powerful earthquake. The continent in the middle of the Atlantic, Plato's Atlantis, sank. Gigantic tsunamis rose. In Central America, entire cities were swept by the waves in minutes. The whole of Egypt was brought down by this tremor. The Impur Papyrus describes an apocalyptic landscape. All good things are gone. There is not one black fingernail left. The plague hit the whole country. There is blood everywhere. The river is blood. The country is without light. All over Earth, the remains collapsed except the most massive. The whole planet was shaken. Ocean levels rose. Coastal towns were overwhelmed by the waters in a few days.
Now, the obvious thing here is that she says the river is blood, the country is without light. But it also says the black of the nail does not remain. So that would be the black of the vav, the tent peg. All good things are gone. So this is the plagues hitting Egypt. All of this land is Shem's land. So that's the entire continent of Africa. Okay, the entire continent of Africa and more. And that includes Brazil. So if you could consider the Atlantic Ocean the Nile, that would mean everything east of Brazil or South America is Abraham's land. And the Shemitic lands are in the south in Brazil. Could the Riyadh structure in Mauritania have anything to do with naming the Riyadh Sea? The Riyadh Sea, Red Sea. And the West Indies would be the point at which it breaks off. And the West Indies is so much like the rest of Africa. Is it perhaps what was formerly a sea between the ridge of the Azores and Mauritania? And that was formerly the Red Sea. This is the whole head of Africa here. And of course, over to the left is the West. Talk about needing to have eyes in the back of your head. And so this is Mauritania, the Riyadh structure. And of course, Mauritania comes from the word Mor, Morishite, Mordecai, Moreh, Morishgath, which is where some of the prophets were from, Mount Moriah, Yasharel. So let's read about the Tower of Babel. According to the book of Jasher, chapter 9, this is what's said about it. And King Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control. And all the earth was of one tongue and words in union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together, put Mitzrayim, Cush, and Canaan with their families, and they said to each other, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching to heaven, and we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars." Now notice that these are the sons of Ham. So Shem has been given rulership over the earth, and this is Canaan, Put, and Mizrahim, and Cush. Okay, and of course Canaan is the seed of the fallen angels. And they all went before the king, and they told the king these words, and the king agreed with him in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled, consisting of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth, and they found none like the valley east of the land of Shinar, about 2 days' walk. And they journeyed there, and they dwelt there, and they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they imagined to complete. So Shinar is part of the land of Ham, the Canaanites, and it's going to be west of the land of Shem. So now they're heading east. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city, a very high, strong tower, and on account of its height, the mortar and the bricks did not reach the builders in their ascent to it until those who went up had completed a full year. And after that, they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and the bricks, and thus was it done daily. And behold, these ascended and others descended the whole day. And if a brick should fall from their hands and get broken, they would all weep over it. But if a man fell and died, none of them would look at him. And as to the tower which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 part thereof, 1/3 part. And a fire also descended from heaven and burned another third, and another third is left to this day. And it is this part which is aloft. And its circumference is 3 days' walk. So the remaining part is 3 days' walk. So the ocean swallowed up one of the 3 towers, fire burned the other third, and 1/3 part remained. So that's what Yah did to destroy the Tower of Babel. So the Riyat structure, that's what it's called, Richat. So Resh, Het, Tav. Okay? Richat structure. Okay? So the head, set apart place of the Tav. Okay? Is 40 kilometers. 40 kilometers. Okay? 40 kilometers. 25 miles. Okay? So if we say, okay, so then what is the calculation for circumference? I'm in Canada, so we do kilometers. But anyway, circumference. It's 2 radius, but it's pi diameter. Okay, if anybody is getting that, is understanding that, is okay with that, right? So it's either 2 pi r or diameter times pi. Okay, so that's how we get the whole circumference of the city. So if it's 25 miles, so anyway, the circumference would be 78 miles. Okay, long story short. So 78 miles. Now, what does it say about Babylon? It's said in the scripture regarding Babylon, Jasher 9, as to the towers which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 part thereof, and a fire also descended from heaven and burned another third. So that's the part, I guess, that's in the ocean, the eye knocked out. And the other third is left to this day, and it is of that part which was aloft. Its circumference is 3 days' walk. Circumference equals 78 miles. Okay, so 78 miles divided by 3. put a little calculator out. Equals like 26 miles. 26 miles. 26 miles. This is just, now we know people may have been larger. And how long does it take a person to walk in a day? 8 hours or less. A trained walker can walk 26 miles. Trained walker can walk at a good pace. So if you're a giant or people were a little bigger back then, take you 3 days to walk around it. The city of Mauritania, that city, that Eye of God city in Mauritania, that connects right up with North America and is basically like what is called, this is the occipital bone here on your head. So basically, that is where Mauritania connects with North America. And you can see how there would be a separation there when the Tower of Babel fell, because it was such, because Yah destroyed it. And it was destroyed by the sea, right? And that's by the sea. And then you could see that after that kind of thing, because there was Pangaea and everything happened in the time of Peleg, when the earth was divided. And so you can see that because of that abominable practice, that might create a fissure or split. But also because that is the separation between the East and the West. And so always I like to go back to these maps. And so the Riyadh structure almost sounds like Riyadh Sea, Red Sea. Like I said, and this may be the connecting point, the place where they crossed over, Israel did, to return to their land when the lands were much closer together.
In a huge work just from the press, an English writer says, "If there be an earthly original for the heavenly Eden, it will be found in equatorial Africa, the land of seething, swarming, multitudinous, and colossal life. This was the world of wet and heaven of heat, the land of equal day and dark, that supplied the two truths of Warti, Egyptian, the top of the world, the very nipple, the kapah, of the breast of earth, which is there one vast streaming fount of moisture quick with life. So surely as a topographical Meru is found in Habesh, so surely is the earthly paradise the original of the mythical which was carried forth over the world by the migrations from Cam, to be found there, if at all."
Before we go on to Mercator and the center of the earth in Europe, I just want to remind you again that Enoch does say that the Most High will descend in the south, and that's according to the Masoretic Enoch. But the Enochian book from Charles Oxford.
The first quarter is called the east, because it is the first, and the second the south, because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend. The first quarter is called the east, because it is the first, and the second the south, because the Most High will descend there. Yea, there in quite a special sense will he who is blessed forever descend.
Enoch in the Jewish Sefer says the first wind is called the eastern because it is the first, and the second is called the south, El Elyon. There descends frequently and descends because it is blessed forever. Charles Oxford, Clarendon Press says, and the first quarter is called the east because it is the first, and the second the south because the Most High will descend there. Yea, it is in a quite special sense he who is blessed forever will descend there. And the west quarter is named the diminished. So to be clear, Western Europe is not part of Europe. So once again, this image of King James family dining reveals who the true owners of the earth are. Of course, his family was wiped out and removed from their throne. And this is a whitewashed image, but it's not as bad as many of them. Cromwell destroyed many of the British aristocracy's paintings. I've done another video on that. But this one at least reveals who the true owner of the earth is, or inheritor of it, on the left-hand side here. At the end of Esau's world, Yah said that Israel will ask the way home. After the 16th century, Mercator, Galileo, and Copernicus and the spiritualist John Dee conspired under the rulership of Queen Elizabeth to turn the world upside down and inside out, seizing on a notion inspired centuries, millennium earlier by the enemy of the earth. Like Hadrian, they conspired to hide Jerusalem. Aristotle hated the Israelites because they refused to pass on the knowledge that Abraham had passed to Jacob when Jacob went to study with him and Shem about the sciences. And we also know that the book of Jubilees and Jasher say that the sciences were taught by Jacob to Joseph. And that's what he was able to school the Egyptians in also. The book of Enoch says many of the chief stars will transgress their order and people will fall down and worship them. People show error and take them to be gods and worship them, and evil shall be multiplied on the earth and punishment shall come upon them. When you've made a solar system of 12 planets rotating around the sun, your heavenly view of the world, are you not making that your God? Are you not making it the ordering principle of your literal, physical, natural world and universe? The question asked by Yah when Adam knew he was naked, who told you that, has to be asked when we hear common sayings. It seems as though Aristotle's spirit of vengeance towards the Hebrew Israelites finally caught up at this time, and Aristotle began to cast a spell with the common saying from years ago that we still use today as our people are under a state of hypnosis. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. It's like he tried to hypnotize all of the surveyors and navigators of the black known Hebrew world. The Edomite Holy Roman emperors who became the rulers of Europe, and so they were black, as was Jacob, so was Esau and the Edomites, black and mixed race people. And so it's no surprise that Mercator was also. The Spanish Inquisition began in 1492, after Columbus had arrived in the New World, and basically everyone was now in the four corners of the earth. Ferdinand and Isabella were very clear that they would not allow people of other religions to harm the conversion of the American Indians, the indigenous Americans' conversion to Catholicism. However, they permitted slaves of sub-Saharan African descent, provided that they were born in Spain. So Spain, Spanish Africans. So this is just before Queen Elizabeth's rule and the influence of John Dee and Mercator. So this was the setup, the enslavement of the people of Israel out of Europe, Western Europe, which was really the land of Shem, to the West Indies, to the Americas. Queen Elizabeth and John Dee appointed Mercator to map these areas. There she is in the bottom left. So the northern kingdom was being taken up into the hands of the enemy, and Israel had to flee from their kingdom. We see the Inquisition beginning. We see the transatlantic slave trade beginning. We see Mercator going to the center of the earth to map the pole. We see John Dee and the physician of Queen Elizabeth claiming that the center of the earth is the magnetic point, not the North Pole, and much more at this particular point in time exactly. So between 1492 and 1575, and in the 1600s, in comes round Earth, all at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. John Dee had commissioned Mercator in 1527 until about 1608. And John Dee was an Anglo-Welsh mathematician. Now remember, the Welsh have the E1B1A genes as well. He was a mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, teacher, occultist. He was the court astrologer and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I and spent much of his time on alchemy, divination, and Hermetic philosophy. As an antiquarian, he had one of the largest libraries in England at the time, and as a political advisor, he advocated for the founding of English colonies in the New World to form a British Empire, a term he is credited with coining. He is the spiritual and political spearhead of the colonialist British Empire. Over the next 70 years of the transatlantic slave trade commencing, Mercator would map the North Pole and the world, obscuring Africa or Afaya from the center of the earth, pushing Israel down to the fake South Pole or into the depths of hell, just as Jonah went into the bottom of the whale. So this is a letter written to John Dee, who was a mysticism spiritualist in 1577, and this is his discoveries of the North Pole, called The Volume of Great and Rich Discoveries, and I'll read from other accounts from the North Pole. In the 1560s and 70s, letters between Mercator and John Dee document the trips that Mercator made up north along with other people to examine Greenland and the farther north regions. As I've said many, many times before, what most of the flat earthers don't take into account is reverse Pangaea. By the grace of Yah, Yah revealed this to me in 2018. You can look back at some of my videos and see.
We read in the book De Inventio Fortunatae that beneath the Arctic Pole there is a high rock of magnetic stone 33 German miles in circumference. The indrawing seas around this rock flowing in as if in a vessel that lets water down a hole, i.e. a funnel. There are 4 surrounding islands, of which 2 are inhabited, but they are bordered by huge mountains 24 days' journey across, which forbid human habitation. Here the indrawing sea begins. Here the ship's compass does not hold, nor can ships containing iron turn back. In note 1, the high rock is said to measure 33 German miles, units which are 4 times the French miles of the Mercator letter.
Netflix is also doing a movie called Cursed about King Arthur that's going to be coming out soon, and King Arthur has many accounts of going to the Pole of the North. King Arthur is supposed to be King Arthur of Camelot and written into much Welsh poetry, but they are not sure whether or not he was fictitious. I still believe that the UK and Spain are the Northern Kingdom. So King Arthur appointed people to report on the areas of the poles, and there were people, Hebrews very likely, descendants of Dubay and those black kings of this kingdom. Their descendants, 3, 4, 5 generations, reported on the nature of the land.
In the King of Norway's court in the year 1364. This priest was descended in the 5th generation from them which King Arthur had sent to inhabit these islands, and he reported in the year 1360, a certain English friar, a Franciscan, and a mathematician of Oxford came into these islands, who leaving them and passing further by his magical art, described all those places that he saw, and took the height of them with his astrolabe, according to the form that I have set down in my map, and as I have taken it out of the aforesaid Jacob Schnoinen. He said that those 4 indrafts were drawn into an inward gulf or whirly pool, with so great a force that the ships which once entered therein could by no means be driven back again, and that there is never in these parts so much wind blowing as might be sufficient to drive a cornmill. Geraldus Cambronales hath certain words altogether alike with these. And from a summary which Dee had drawn up from Mercator's letter for the information of the Queen. Anno 1360, that is to wit, in the 34 years of the reign of the triumphant King Edward III, a friar of Oxford, being a good astronomer, went in company with others to the most northern islands of the world, and there leaving his company together, he travelled alone and purposely described all the northern islands, with the indrawing seas and the record thereof. At his return he delivered to the King of England. the name of which book is Inventio Fortunatae, Alter Fortunae. Here live pygmies at most 4 feet tall, who are like those in Greenland called Skraelings. This channel is entered by 3 mouths and remains frozen for 3 months every year. It's 37 leagues long. This island is the best and healthiest of the whole north. The ocean rushes in between these islands by 19 mouths and makes 4 channels by which it is incessantly carried northwards, and there it disappears into the bowels of the earth.
So it's no coincidence that the movie Ares, or Ares, Ares standing for Mars, the planet Mars, the god of war, or Ares, the ram, is the name of this Dutch film, and the final image is of this swirling whirlpool, a swirling whirlpool. It's the very telling horror movie that I reviewed on my channel about the Dutch. And so go ahead and watch it. It reveals a lot of secrets about these things I'm talking about. This is one of the final images, the swirling whirlpool image that it speaks to.
So, the night skies of Eden. What we'll notice is that that he was incorrect about the rotundity of the earth. He believed that the earth is round. But everything else, all the other information that he adds up in this, is perfectly in tune with flat earth cosmology. And actually it's amazing that he missed it. It's almost as though he put this together to throw people off of the flat earth. Because all the information in it, even when it points to flat earth, they try to twist it as though it doesn't indicate a flat earth. And we've all seen the Egyptian cosmology pictures, and you'll see that he tries to say that the Egyptians say that the earth was round. So, just kind of funny. So that was the antipodal polar mountains. This is a great chapter. We're going to get to this shortly. Part 4, the 4th part. Part 4th. The hypothesis confirmed by ethnic traditions. Chapter 1, the ancient cosmology and mythical geography. The cradle of the race in the Japanese, Chinese, Aryan, Hindu, Iranian, Persian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, ancient Egyptian, and ancient Greek. And as I was saying, those are all perfect flat earth cosmologies. There's no doubt about it. We'll go through each one, including the Greeks. Yeah, Homer. That Homer talks about the firmament, and Hades, and heavens, and angels, and Zeus, and all of that. The heavenly chariots, the earth of the Hindus, Bharata, Kimpurusha, Haravarska, the earth of the Hindus. And then again, so this would be Mount Meru in the center, sticking up. The earth of the Persians. And again, see, that was the flat earth from above. So we'll look at it again. The North Pole. Amazing. This is the Persians. So there's Sumeru again, which ascends to the heavens. We're looking straight down at it. That's the center of the flat earth map. The North Pole ascends to the heavens there. There it is. The North Pole. And this one leaves out, of course, the detail that we have in our other maps there from Mercator. One of the most interesting and pathetic passages to be found in all literature is that in which Christopher Columbus announces to his royal patrons his supposed discovery of the ascent to the gate of the long-lost Garden of Eden. With what emotions must his heart have thrilled as, steering up this ascent, he felt his ship smoothly rising toward the sky, the weather becoming milder as he rose. To be so near the paradise of God's own planting, to be the first discoverer of the way in which the believing world could at length, after so many ages, once more approach its sacred precincts, even if forbidden to enter. What an exquisite experience it must have been to the lonely spirit of that great explorer. It is his 3rd voyage. He is in the Gulf of Paria, to the north or northwest of the mouth of the Orinoco. In his loyal epistle to Ferdinand and Isabella, thus he writes, "The Holy Scriptures record that our Lord made the earthly paradise, and planted in it the tree of life, and thence springs a fountain from which the 4 principal rivers of the world take their source, namely the Ganges in India, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Nile. I do not find, nor ever have found, any account by the Romans or Greeks which fixes in a positive manner the site of the terrestrial paradise. Neither have I seen it given in any map monde laid down from authentic sources. Some placed it in Ethiopia at the sources of the Nile, but others, traversing all these countries, found neither the temperature nor the altitude of the sun correspond with their ideas respecting it, nor did it appear that the overwhelming waters of the deluge had been there.
You've heard of the man in the moon. Clearly, it's a Babylonian concept with the right eye poked out. The man in the moon. But it actually comes from the word mundi also. The man in the mundi. Mundi means earth in both Latin and French. And you might have noticed back there when I mentioned the letters between John Dee and Mercator, there's a manuscript called The Volume of Great and Rich Discoveries, and one of the letters between the two of them is called Imago Mundi, Volume XIII. Okay? So they're also shifting the concept of the face of the earth being the face of the moon and the man in the moon, rather than mundi, which is Latin and French, meaning the face of the earth and the man in the earth. And that is the man facing southeast also. So you can see here Mount Meru, the world mountain, as described here, is surrounded by holy radiation with the sun and moon circling around it as depicted in this old image from Buddhism, of course, which of course we don't agree with. But you can see here in the center to the right and the left of the moon of the mountain is the sun and the moon. And of course, Africa is called the place of the mountains of the moon. And of course, when we talk about the reverse Pangaea, we know that Africa would be up here at the center of the earth. And so if we look at the mountains of the moon, we discover that perhaps Columbus wasn't so far off in estimating that Africa was part of it. It's just that he was far off time-wise in terms of the geographical movement. So let's take a look at the mention of the mountains of the moon. And of course, if we look at this animation here of how the sun moves, we see that both it and the moon create this lotus-like shape in a spiral over the center of the earth, which is where the mountains of the moon would be. If the moon was to bring in her course, she would hit the mountains here. And notice how they only talk about the moon. They don't also talk about the sun, but the sun does hit this area as well. So you can see here Mount Meru, the world mountain, as described here, is surrounded by holy radiation with the sun and moon circling around it as depicted in this old image from Buddhism, of course, which of course we don't agree with. But you can see here in the center to the right and the left of the moon of the mountain is the sun and the moon. And of course, Africa is called the place of the mountains of the moon. And of course, when we talk about the reverse Pangaea, we know that Africa would be up here at the center of the earth. And so if we look at the mountains of the moon, we discover that perhaps Columbus wasn't so far off in estimating that Africa was part of it. It's just that he was far off time-wise in terms of the geographical movement. So let's take a look at the mention of the mountains of the moon. And of course, if we look at this animation here of how the sun moves, we see that both it and the moon create this lotus-like shape in a spiral over the center of the earth, which is where the mountains of the moon would be. If the moon was to bring in her course, she would hit the mountains here. And notice how they only talk about the moon. They don't also talk about the sun, but the sun does hit this area as well. Columbus may not have been altogether wrong, given the connection of the continent of Africa originally to the center north. Again, what Columbus had to say about Eden, the mountains of the moon, what Columbus had to say about Eden after he discovered America with all the black navigators. Of paradise I cannot speak properly, for I was not there. It is far beyond, and I repent not going there, but I was not worthy. But as I have heard say of wise men beyond, I shall tell you with good will. Terrestrial paradise, as men say, wise men say, is the highest place of the earth, and it is so high that it nearly touches the circle of the moon there, as the moon makes her turn. For it is so high that the flood of Noah might not come to it, that would have covered all the earth of the world, all about and above and beneath, except paradise. And this paradise is enclosed all about with a wall. See, the navigators of the earth understood that the moon made a circle in towards the center of the earth and back towards the outer ring of the earth. And that included Columbus. Before the transatlantic slave trade was in full swing. Everyone knew this. Some have placed paradise in the third heaven, some in the fourth, in the heaven of the moon, in the moon itself, on a mountain near the lunar heaven, in the middle of the region of the air. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. The sun and the moon are the same size. As he rises, so he sets and decreases not, and rests not, but runs day and night, and his light is sevenfold brighter than that of the moon. But as regards size, they are both equal. Enoch 74:37. What does the Targum say? Yahuwah in Genesis 1 made two great luminaries equal in glory. And they ruled 21 days, plus a number of other days. And afterwards the moon recited against the sun a false report, and she was diminished. And the sun was appointed to be the greater light to rule the day, and the moon the inferior light to rule the night. So this wasn't in terms of size that they were diminished, that the moon was diminished, but she was diminished in terms of light. And so you'll note that they don't talk about the sun because they're formulating the globe Earth, where the Earth revolves around the sun. In their new cosmology, Mercator is creating. So that's why in these accounts, they only mention the moon being at the mountains, okay? Because they're creating a new narrative. And of course, the moon calendar was the official calendar of the Greeks. And when Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East in the 4th century BCE, the lunar calendar was introduced and was gradually accepted by most of the people, except for the Hebrews. In 172 BCE, King Antiochus appointed Menelaus as Jerusalem's high priest to introduce the Greek way of educating young people and to completely Hellenize the Hebrew people. He also sent a senator from Athens to give the Hebrew people an ultimatum: forsake the laws of Yahuwah and follow the kings in order, or else be put to death. So most of the Hebrew people followed the king's orders to save their families, and many were put to death. And King Antiochus forced the Hebrew people to celebrate the birthday of the month every month at the time of the moon's first visibility. And so again, this is a conspiracy to hide the true biblical cosmology. Yes, I'm also saying that Europe, that Britannia, Spain, Western Europe, Dan River, Germania, all of that is the land of Shem, all of it. And so this is why when you hear about Abraham or Abram going to Egypt, he goes down to Egypt. He goes down to Egypt. He goes down from the tree, from the top branch, down to Egypt, and he goes to the west because Africa is in the west and Aphia is Shem's land. And so just to confirm again, they went down from the upper regions of Chaldea, the top branch of the earth. So the earth is like this tree. It has planes that spiral downwards like the Bayet symbol. And the Chaldeans were at the top branch, so they went down to other lands. According to Flavius Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews in chapter 7, it says that he went out of the land of the Chaldeans. Okay, and it says that here, when we read down in the middle, it says, "Thus Abraham reigned at Damascus, being a foreigner who came with an army out of the land above Babylon, called the land of the Chaldeans." Okay, so he went down from the giant plane tree towards Babylon, towards the west, but he was still in the land of Shem. So this is why we link Mauritania, as I said before, with all that reverse Pangaea and all those videos about Egypt. We link Mauritania and possibly that Atlantis land back to North America, back to the original connecting point and the original explosion and separation point, because of crossing the Red Sea and what happened to Egypt, and because of what happened to Babylon. The waters overcame and the land was driven apart. We also connect Gibraltar to Spain and to Britannia and to what is so-called Western Europe. Because what happens when they cross the Red Sea? If they cross from that quote Atlantis land that was perhaps earlier, but right up against North America in the Gulf, right? If they crossed over, and that was the Reed Sea lining up with the Riyadh structure, the Red Sea, they would meet the gates of Gibraltar, the two choices, blessings and cursings. And then Yah would say, "You've been around this mountain long enough. Head north," is what he says. Head north. So that would be heading towards the land of Japheth, but it would also be heading towards the North Star, the Polar Star. So once again, the land in the Shefunkta, Floridas, does have a lot of the Hebrew people there who either went there on ship or got left there or came over the top of the pole or came from the east, because there's a lot of lands named Azareth in the east above Mongolia and beyond Korea and the Philippines. So there are a group of Hebrews who ended up back in Ham's land. In the scripture, Yah is always saying, don't go down to Mitzrayim, don't go down to Mitzrayim. So it's very natural that the other tribes would have scattered back there again and even been broken away as the continents divided. Or they would have gone there by ship as the lands were closer together. And so when we look at these maps, we see that this land here would be pushed, North America would be pushed really over into this quadrant. Part of it's dragged into the southern area. Big Judah is right. Now, I'm not saying Big Judah is right about everything. I'm saying he is right about North America. It was in 2nd Esdras 13, I think it is, 43 or whatever. It was given to Israel. Okay, we know that. But that doesn't make it the promised land where you stay, because the west is determined for destruction. It's Babylon. All right? 2nd Esdras 13:43, around that area. Check it out for yourself. The Assyrian captivity led the 10 tribes to Eretz Azareth, which is on this national Canadian map. And that is where the 10 tribes went. And when you look at the world map, you see the back of the head of Africa connects to what is called Shefunkta now, and that is the Florida region, where a lot of the 10 tribes, the black people with kinky hair, not the Bering Crossing semi-Asian looking people, but that is where some of the 10 tribes dwelt. And of course that is confirmed in the Jewish Encyclopedia and in the account by Columbus, who brought with him Hebrew interpreters to speak with the people who were residing there in North America. And he was fond of reading the fourth book of Esdras, which is known as Second Esdras, because this is where they went to dwell in a land where no man dwelt, time out of mind, out of last and final place. You can hear when I read the scripture, the account of the lands allotted to Shem, it says it extends from the Great Sea. So I think when you look to the north and to the south in these areas at the center of the earth, you see 4 rivers extending out from the center of the earth, but there's 2 great seas. So one divides North America from the continent of Russia or Europe, and then the other one divides North America from the continent of Africa. Of course, we see Shem's land would encompass all of Western Europe, all the way to Germany and such. So this movie, Greenland, has just come out, and it's all about, when the apocalypse really comes and starts hitting and all these meteors are crashing and falling down on everybody, this family is like running. So here it is anyway, and they're fleeing, and Greenland is the destination. That's where they're telling everyone to run to. So there's going to be a place on this earth that is safe, where people can run to, and this is it. They're saying Greenland. All the elites are talking about it. Why would they say that? Because they're thinking it's the one place that won't be affected by the dissimulation of the whole earth, because every mountain will be leveled, as Yah says. And there's going to be tidal waves and earthquakes, and all of this kind of stuff is going to be going on. Discuss the fact that the head of Africa was traumatized, and it was thrown apart from its link to the rest of its afro, being the West. Delilah seduced him, and Samson lost his hair. And he was actually, Israel was actually deadly wounded in the head, if you want to look at the land that way. Okay? And what does the scripture say? The whole head is sick, from the toes to the top of the head. This is the fall of Israel. And there's a guy who does this Mud Fossil University. He's a very established member of academia who focuses, just like I have, on these land masses as seen through Google Earth. And there is a depiction over the land of Africa where we would find the top of the head of Africa. There is what seems to be a fallen dragon fossil and a fish that seems to have gotten into the brain of the head of Africa. So Dagon the fish, and of course Hasatan the dragon. And there's even a story of the Leviathan that goes into this. There's a lot of dragon mysteries and stories that are embedded in one of these ancient maps that correspond to stories of slain dragons in particular lands. And so this is, in the natural, you see the destruction of the head of Yasharel by Dagon the fish and the dragon. And what's really interesting is that you can look at some of these structures, and the areas that they mine are the eyes. For example, the eye of the fish is where there's a lot of mining done, because where the eye of the fish is, there's a lot of precious probably gems, because it's a lens, it's an eye. And so those things might be used for things like cell phones, computer screens, that kind of thing. So that is basically, in the natural, how the fall of the head of the earth also happens. So that's just a fun fact, and you can go to Mud Fossil University on YouTube, and he is a very established scientist, and he will even show you the body of Eve, all kinds of things and the materials which a lot of these stones and caves are made up out of it, and it's like blood. So there's a lot more going on than we know about. So just please remember the compass at the center of the earth and the fact that the head of the earth is Jacob, and that is the face of the earth, as it should be when we reverse Pangaea. Family, thank you so much for watching, and may Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you. May he be great. Remember also, Israel in the time of Solomon was a light unto the nations. Revelation 21:23, and the city that has no need of sun or moon to sun on your night. For the day of glory of Yah will be your everlasting light, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Isaiah 9:2, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. That's also Matthew 4:16. So the Dark Ages truly began after Solomon's empire, and then truly after the fall of the temple in Israel in 70 AD. And you can see how those ley lines drew everything together over the entire earth, and why those Solomonic, they call them almanac, but Solomonic heads were even in Brazil and South and Central America, and Stonehenge. All of those were radiating that light and joining together the whole world in the empire of Solomon, the greatest empire in the world. And that's why you should be very dismissive when someone says America is the greatest empire ever. And remember that Aruga is the head of the belt of Orion, who is also the Messiah, who will take his sword and destroy hell and death, as pictured here. This symbol of Aries is not necessarily the ram, but looks with its horns up, looks more like the goat. And so the Aleph is at the center of the Milky Way, or the Great Rift, which is where the waters of Eden pour down from. And it seems like the equator has slipped, or the center of the Earth's focus has slipped, and that is why the scripture says that the Most High will most assuredly descend in the south. Hallelujah. Thank you so much for watching, and may Yah bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you. May he be gracious, lift the light of his countenance, and give you peace. And I pray also that you would go and get the calendar, Moed, appointed times into all truth, and that you would also get the cookbook Chaya, Eat, Life, and Fast, which I will eventually update, so keep in touch with me and my channel for updates. And add yourself to the email list so I can email you whenever there's a video, because I am very powerfully shadow banned. Nobody is bringing this information out that Yah gave to me. And of course, it is a remnant, so my channel is small. But anyway, thank you for those who do donate. I get pretty regular people inquiring of and trying to get the calendar. I'd like to give something in return when you make a donation, and so I give you the book or the calendar. So, Baruch atah, Shalom.